And then in the intervening year and a half, the Swedish postal regulator, or whatever their old school name for their communications
PTS
regulator,
or whatever.
just went
post-traumatic Sweden syndrome or something.
they
I don't know.
They just went. She went. No, we'll have no Chinese vendors in our network. Sorry, Sweden. I couldn't resist. And how's that as a Swedish accent?
It's pretty good. I like it.
Okay. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. This can be our last one for quite a while. Pierre's off to lurk in France for a month and do fuck all like the rest of France does in August. It's true though, isn't it? Well, I mean, I say fuck all, obviously have a laugh and like go for walks and have barbecues and just generally live your life. I don't certainly mean it in a negative or judgmental way. No. And this time next week I will be on my way to Suffolk to hang out in a cottage for a bit with the family. Have you got any holiday stuff going
on? Supposedly
Slovakia
from next Friday. Same day as you, basically.
So the supposedly bit depends on whether they shift the goalposts on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to try and go
stuff
anyway, but I'm slightly worried about running into issues at stopping off points on the way because
it's not a straight flight.
It just looks complicated.
Right.
You're not actually supposed to
go to Prague and then hop across or something like that.
You do. Well, we actually booked flights to Eastern Czech Republic, a place called Brno.
Okay.
Only because Magda, my wife, wanted to spend a few days there and then go to Slovakia. And actually, you can't go into the Czech Republic and spend time there. You have to go into quarantine. But you can use it for transit. So if you arrive and go straight to Slovakia, then you can. You can't fly into Slovakia from the UK at the moment. If you're from the UK, if you're a UK passport holder rather, but you can cross a land border from the Czech Republic. We didn't plan it that way.
So how
just
far is
Brno
from where your wife's family live?
A couple hundred miles.
Oh,
three or 400 maybe. It's quite a nice train journey though. We've done it on the train before. It's quite good fun. Don't mind. I quite like trains anyway.
So in summary, a few of your arrangements are still up in the air.
Yeah, well, of course we have to get all the tests done, like you did the process you went through when you went to the Canary Islands. We've got all of that, and then coming back we have to get tests. That's whatever it is, second day arriving back test and all that crap. And
so much for Freedom Day, eh? More on that later.
I mean, we can't do anything about what the Europeans do, I suppose.
No,
but
that's one thing. That's one thing I have to explain to people. People going, well, you'll get a vaccine passport to get to Spain. Oh yeah. But that's Spain's cool.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have a vaccine passport.
But if we didn't, I suppose if
road.
we didn't do the second day test, we'd have all these people up in arms about, you're still letting people in who are bringing in new variants and all that rubbish. So, which could go on for years until someone says, hang on a minute, maybe it's time to just
we're just going to have to live with this.
Yeah, because there could always be a new variant, couldn't there?
Well, indeed. We're going to run out of Greek letters.
Yeah, we're going to have a whinge about this later as well, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. So let's keep our powder dry on that one. And what else is there? We were just out again at the refinery, getting a bit of a tan, having a cheeky pint beforehand. Yeah. It's going to be the last nice day for a little while.
Apparently.
So
no one warned me of that until I checked the weather forecast today.
Right.
I'm supposed to be having a barbecue tomorrow.
Are you?
With my parents.
It's going to piss it down.
This is going to be cooking indoors.
You're going to have that classic English barbecue with an umbrella.
Yeah.
So that's all good. What else have we got to chat about? Pierre, you were talking about places that are listening to us this month.
City of the month, which is drum roll. No,
drum roll.
It's Bath, England.
Bath,
and close second is Kearney, New Jersey.
Kearney.
I'm more surprised by Bath.
Kearny.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Sounds like a surname. Irish surname, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. New Jersey and Bath. Well, I've got one more to add to the mix. We got an email from a guy. I don't want to reveal his name. I'm going to call him Diego because he's Argentine and my middle name's Diego because I was born in Chile. But you know who you are, Diego. And he goes, he just goes, I really like the pod. And I just thought it's cool that it was just, it's the amazing thing about the internet. You got Argentines listen to us. Yep. English presumably isn't his first language. and he's enjoying it. And he's a proper, he says he works as a RAN analyst. And I'm not even gonna say which Argentine telco he works for because I don't want to give his identity away. But he sent me an email full of quite technical stuff that, quite frankly, not all of it I fully understood, revealing the fact that I'm a dilettante. I've never claimed to be otherwise, though, in my defence. No. And just saying he's a bit frustrated. He's talking about Open RAN a fair bit, and he just feels that in Argentina, the regulators are being a bit shit about opening certain things up, spectrum, technologies, all that sort of thing. And I don't want to slag off Argentina in general. It doesn't surprise me that much to hear that some of their state institutions aren't the most helpful.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's great. It's great to get in touch. You had some guy get in touch on LinkedIn, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean it was a public forum actually. It wasn't a private message, so he could be named. Get the details up. He works for systems integrator called Worldwide Technology.
Yeah, I've done that.
I knew them before.
Yeah, I did some work with them on Telecoms.com not too long ago.
Yeah, he's called Paul Rhodes.
Okay.
And he's like his job title is Open RAN and 5G Principal Consultant for.
So we're getting a fair bit of Open RAN traffic.
GSP International, which is then a part of Worldwide Technology. Okay. So, but he said he really liked the pod, and then again made some quite technical points about radios. I kind of did get it, and you would as well. Actually, he was talking about the costs because I think we'd spent one time talking about BT and difficulty of rolling out 5G and why it's taking a long time.
Okay.
And he said that one thing we didn't consider was apparently. It's an interesting point to make. When they were rolling out 4G in 2012, a lot of it was sort of low-level stuff and quite easy to and sort of easier equipment to install. Okay. Whereas they're now using these 20-meter high poles to get these 50-kilogram boxes, like these massive MIMO boxes.
It's just a lot more.
It's quite hard work. It's not just a cost. I think it's shutting down streets to do it. This is why we talked about weight before, haven't we? Weight of equipment and. Yeah, that issue seems to be getting resolved, so maybe that'll speed it up a bit. But
so what I take away from just anecdotal things like that is, and we've had some people flag this up internally, is us chatting about moderately technical stuff, but in words of one syllable.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what pods are all about. Is nearly all pods I listen to, they get into the weeds. Even if it's someone like Joe Rogan who's got a wide range of different things he talks about, each conversation he has, he does get in the weeds, but it doesn't feel inaccessible.
Yeah.
Even if he's got someone like Eric Weinstein on who starts talking about sort of higher maths or theoretical physics, Joe Rogan sooner or later will go, well, hold on a sec, mate, I don't know what the fuck you're going on about here, mate. You're going to have to dial it down a little bit. And hopefully that's what we do. Maybe I'm Joe Rogan to your Eric Weinstein.
I think you're flattering me there.
Cool. All right. Well, let's crack on with it. What are we going to chat about? So we're going to start by talking. There was a story. I think I wrote it before you.
You did.
About China Mobile awarding. It's had another sort of tender for its 5G work, and it does it per sort of spectrum. And so the last lot it did was 2.6 gigahertz.
Yeah, this is part of the phase one last year. 5G
that's right. And anyway, I won't get into it now. But this time it was 700 megahertz, and basically there were some different vendors given different stuff, and there's a story in that.
Yeah.
Then we're going to talk about we're going to talk about dumb pipes, which is a very venerable topic within telecoms, and we've certainly spoken about it plenty of times on this pod, which is are operators merely utilities? Are they dumb pipes like a water company is a dumb pipe?
Yeah.
Or do they add some kind of intrinsic value? Do they have some kind of augmented extra special relationship with their customers other than just providing this data pipe? And we're going to talk about that. You did an interview with Vion, and I think there's one or two stories I can throw into the mix on that. And then we're going to finish, given this is our last one. So this is the last one you can hear from us readers, listeners, audience, however I call you collectively. Last one you can hear from us for at least, I think, 3 weeks. So try and cope. Go and have a summer holiday. That might help. A bit of time on the beach might help with the withdrawal symptoms from the Telecoms.com podcast. So we thought we'd just be self-indulgent and get on some bugbears. There's some these have some reflection on tech/telecoms stuff, but it's mainly just you and me
Yeah.
just deciding to have a rant at the end.
Yeah, it is.
So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so this... oh, yeah. Pierre's just pointing at me. And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the website, you can listen to it on SoundCloud, Appleness, and all that.
You did that really well, that, but
I know, I keep forgetting. I've lost my confidence after he corrected me last week.
What about Bribe of the Week?
And if you listen to... Oh, yeah, that's a good point. And if you listen to it, you can watch it as well. Anyway, just look just Google Telecoms.com
You can listen to it or watch
Jesus
it.
Christ, have I got to do all the work for you?
Somewhere
What's going on? Bride of the Week.
Bribe
Yes,
of
I
the
forgot
Week.
about Bride of the Week because I was not the recipient of Bride of the Week, but you were,
I
Ian,
was.
so tell us about it.
Well, I was an unexpected bribe. I got it was sort of after the fact had happened, really, because a box turned up yesterday with a bottle of wine in it, some Spanish ham, bit of cheese, some olives.
Was it Manchego?
It was Manchego.
That still cracks me up, that podcast when you kept trying to force bits of Manchego into my face while I was trying to talk.
Yeah. Courtesy of Orange.
Orange?
Yeah. He would normally have obviously plied.
So what are they
me
doing
all
with
this
the sort of jamon serrano and the Manchego? Why are they getting all Spanish on it?
Well, they would normally, they were saying, there's a nice letter in it from the PR people at Orange who I know quite well, and they're very nice.
They've got quite a lot of Emmas, I seem to remember.
It's Emma, Vanessa, Nicole, and
There we go.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
but
Nicole. Or maybe Nicole's I'm thinking of. They've got
they
Nicole.
sent they sent this. I mean, normally I think they're expecting people to go over there and meet them there. Obviously, and there'd be a bit of hospitality, should we
Bit of
say?
schmoozing.
Bit of schmoozing. So this was a
God,
sort
we
of
missed that, don't we?
substitute for that. You know, they couldn't do their normal meal out when they take people out.
And this was you chatting to...
Well, I did. Yeah, it followed an interview that a few journalists did with their CTO a few weeks ago, actually, about... That was a good news story, actually. It was the whole sort of twin network thing they're doing in this French town.
Oh, yeah.
You know, taking advantage of artificial intelligence and open
All that
RAN and
jazz.
all the sort of anything you can think of that's
The
state
town
of the art.
is now sentient. Yeah.
Yeah,
Lannion is the town.
I know.
Yeah.
It's
In Brittany, yeah.
Yeah,
It's now called Skynet.
exactly.
Or Le Skynet.
So presumably they sent a few of these boxes around, but it's very, very nice anyway. Thank you, Orange. I didn't
Cool.
I didn't send an email yet. So
And you didn't get much of a look
watching.
at the wine, did you?
no, that didn't last very long. My wife's off on holiday, so she'd already
Got stuck in at lunchtime. Fair play to her. Nice one, Magda. Not that you probably watch the podcast, but fair play to you. Cool.
She watches the promos sometimes, so Pierre decides to put that in the promo.
Right,
I'll be in trouble.
okay. Yeah, that'll probably...
But
Yeah. Especially if she's well into a bottle of wine at a time. She'll be like, hey! Anyway. It doesn't seem like a very Magda gesture, if I'm honest.
no,
Okay, cool. Yes, this I can do that. We've done all our bits and bobs, haven't we?
yeah. Should we go home now?
I know. About 15 minutes of bits and bobs now. So, yes, a year or so ago, probably more like 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So China Mobile is the biggest Chinese mobile operator by quite a long way, isn't it? But then there's two other big ones, which is China Telecom and China Unicom.
They're all pretty big.
They're all pretty big,
yeah.
but China Mobile is like an order of magnitude bigger, I think.
Yeah,
It's got like a zillion subscribers by itself.
yeah, 900 million. or
It's
something
certainly by far the
ridiculous.
biggest operator in the world by
Yeah.
subscriber number, isn't it? And a couple of years ago, let's say, they had this 2.6 gigahertz, which is like mid-band 5G allocation.
Only last year.
It was only last year?
Yeah,
Okay.
early last year,
Early
quite
last
early,
year.
sort of February, March time.
Year and
I
a half
think.
then.
Yeah,
I cut my own throat.
yeah.
And they the news about it was sort of twofold. You expect in China for Chinese vendors to get most of it.
Yeah.
And yes, that's not ideal, but everyone's a little bit protectionist, so we're not going to get too moralistic about it. But they still gave Ericsson about 12% share of their work, and then the rest going mainly to Huawei and ZTE.
Yeah.
And Nokia got fuck all.
Yeah.
And that was a story as well, because this was at a time when Nokia was admitting to sort of falling a bit short on 5G. And then in the intervening year and a half, the Swedish postal regulator, or whatever their old school name for their communications
PTS
regulator,
or whatever,
just went.
Post-traumatic Sweden syndrome or something.
They
I don't know.
They just went. She went. No, we'll have no Chinese vendors in our network. Sorry, Sweden. I couldn't resist. And how was that as a Swedish accent?
It's pretty good. I like it.
Okay.
I'm like trying to think, was this more German or
Yeah, sort of Central European type of thing. Yeah. And yeah, they kicked him out. And other people have done that. The UK's done it. Other countries have done it. But I think other countries have done a bit of a better job of fudging it. Like we initially went, oh, we'll let him in a bit. And then afterwards went, oh, maybe not. And the EU on the whole has gone, we'll have a look, we'll do a security review. And they just keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, well, they made one company a big target, didn't they? That's the problem. I mean, I suspect the Chinese have been grumbling about what the UK's done as well. Listen to the ambassador, and I haven't looked into the details of things that the Chinese have done to other bits of the UK.
No Ferrero Rocher from their ambassador. He's like, no.
That's an old commercial.
I said, because I don't want to be xenophobic and do a Chinese accent, I'll do a Cockney accent. No fucking Rocher for you, son.
But because I don't pay that much attention to things outside telecom in detail, I don't really know whether there's sectors of the British economy that have taken a bit of a hit from China as a result of what's happened.
Like retaliatory.
Yeah, and they've definitely been retaliatory to the US for a long time now with things that they've done.
Not that much, though.
Well, there's only so much they can do.
Well, they could do things like ban Apple.
They could. That's true. Yeah,
so they could have been a lot more retaliatory.
But I think banning Apple would hurt them as much as it would hurt the US.
That's always the problem. That's always
they have to find something they can do that hurts the US without. So they've done. I mean, they've been doing currency manipulation for years, which hurts the US arguably indirectly. But they've done things on. They've imposed a lot of tariffs on US goods. It's just that the balance of trade is not. It's not the same flow, is it?
It always feels a bit superficial. Then you get this tit for tat. Yeah, and everyone goes, "Oh, well done."
Yeah. So there's kind of less they can do, but they've definitely done things. But the problem with the Swedish decision is that they've got this. There was a direct way of countering it in a very telecomsy way.
So that was the story. To go on to my coverage of it. So there was just this one announcement from China Mobile, and it's all in Chinese. But Google Translate, fair play to it. I mean, I wouldn't know how to translate
I get credit
Chinese.
for doing it, to be honest, because I looked at your story and then I looked at the thing you linked to, and I thought, oh my God.
Where did he get that from?
How the hell did he put that together from that statement?
So it was largely Google Translate, but it also turns out that numbers...
I wondered if you put way on it.
No, not at all. It's because it's a combination of Google Translate and the fact that numbers seem to be global.
Yeah.
So you've got all these, and I stress, I absolutely love Chinese, Japanese, Korean, whatever, those characters.
Yeah.
Those sort of almost hieroglyphs they have. I think they're amazing to look at. I think they're so artistic.
I had a great time doing it then.
But somehow Google's clever algorithm, and we'll slag off Google and we'll plenty times in the future, has a way of turning those hieroglyphs into English.
Yeah, it's quite amazing.
Which is pretty amazing. In fact, let's click through. I've got it auto-translating, so I won't see it for long. But, it's obviously utter gibberish, but then with numbers every now and then.
Right.
Yeah, there it is. Look at that. It translates it within a second. And so the numbers were there. And what they did was they announced they had 3 sort of lots. And they announced that in lot 1, for example, there are about 190,000 base stations. And then they announced the percentage that each vendor got. So in lot 1, there were 190,061 base stations, of which Huawei got 61.12%, ZTE 28.77%, and Nokia 10.11%, which the Nokia bit's obviously a major part of this story, which I kind of sort of given away too early, but there we go. And so I just put it into a spreadsheet and just did total times percentage equals the amount of base stations they got, because what they didn't do is give us grand totals for all 3 of these lots that they did. And so then I was able to add up those totals and then work out the percentages.
So how many base stations is it altogether?
Altogether 48,000 and change.
480,000?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I said. 480,397. We're being precise. That's quite a lot of base stations.
It's quite a lot of base stations, yeah.
Of which Huawei got 288,000 odd, ZTE got about 150,000, Nokia got about 20k. Datang, which is a Chinese state-owned thing, got about 15k, and Ericsson got less than 10k. So there's two aspects to this story, and then I'll stop banging on and get you to give us your perspective. Two aspects to this story. One is the change in non-Chinese vendors. So there's a lower proportion on the whole, only 6%, and then Nokia was back in the game, and not just back in the game, but got twice as much as Ericsson. And do you remember, in fact, I think you put it in the trailer, Pierre, for the pod we did last week, where I was doing my Xi Jinping sounding like Ray Winston thing. And he's going, how about we stick your fucking neighbours in and give them a little bit more? And that's basically what they did.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying Nokia didn't deserve it. We've said plenty of times they've raised their game in the intervening time. But it does feel like a diss that Ericsson went down from 12% to 2%, and at the same time Nokia got twice as much, 4%.
Yeah.
So that's one part of the story, and then the other part of the story is just the round percentages. When you add them all up, which they didn't publicise in this China Mobile thing, but me doing my little bit of spreadsheetery, there were clear percentages. It was like 60.0% to Huawei, 31.0% to ZTE, 4 to Nokia, 3 to Datang, and 2 to Ericsson. And so the biggest thing that says to me is the whole thing was engineered. There's nothing competitive about it.
No.
It was preordained. It's predetermined. This is how it was going to go.
And I think, I mean, in a market where 90% of the work goes to your two local firms, then it's pretty obvious what's going on anyway, isn't it? But
but it's when it's blatant, because everyone's playing these little games, aren't they?
Yeah.
Everyone's accusing each other of bad faith when everyone's operating in bad faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, we call out the Americans all the time. We call out the Brits, and I'm going to later over things like censorship. All politicians take the piss all the time.
Yeah.
But there's sort of deniability.
But the argument on the trade side of things about, I think that's a valid point, that for years Europe's allowed Huawei to come in. I mean, Huawei was the biggest 4G vendor in Europe, yeah? Possibly still is, even after all the pushback.
Yeah.
I don't really know, but it certainly was.
There was certainly no state predetermination of how much they could have.
They were definitely the biggest vendor in the UK, massively. 2/3 of the BT network they were providing to Vodafone. They were, they did a deal with Three eventually. They were, and massive in Germany. I mean, they still are. So they were. There was no. We're not going to allow.
It's only really when the Yanks started pressuring.
It was very, very recent. So the argument that which I know. People like John Strand, for instance, a consultant with Strand Consult, has always said, well, why should we allow Huawei to compete in Europe? It's a sort of tit for tat thing, I guess. Why should we allow Huawei to compete in Europe when European vendors have stood no chance in China? They've only ever had 10% of the market, basically.
Yeah,
and it's true. It's clearly skewed to not allow foreign companies to come in, and they're not that different actually from. I mean, the Indians are like this, aren't they? India is very much like this now, made in India, and foreign investors have always had a hard time in the telecom market in India. They weren't allowed to actually own a big stake in. You had to have a local partner to do it.
Yes.
And then look how badly they've been treated over the last few years. I did a story that's a bit of a tangent, but I did a story on Telenor this week about all of its, which we talked about recently anyway, all of its foreign sort of misadventures. The latest one being Myanmar, but
that's right. I think I saw the headline, and they're still plugging away in certain places.
Well, they were asked on the earnings call about, do we need to assess, Asian stuff differently now? Isn't it become a bit risky? Because the guy who asked the questions, an analyst from Jefferies, saying, India didn't work out for you, Myanmar's not worked out for you, brought up all these basically examples. And I looked at the Indian case because people forget, a lot of the focus has been on Vodafone and all its problems in India. But Telenor had a terrible time in India.
They went in about a couple of years ago.
They went in and bought all these licenses, bought a stake in this business, lost money for years. I mean, they racked up about $3 billion in losses, I think, US dollars. Wow. And then eventually had to just basically exit and sell it to Bharti Airtel because it just became, they were bogged down in legal cases with the Indians about not, because the Indians wanted to cancel their licenses on the grounds that they were awarded irregularly, but also they wanted payment for them anyway.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So we're going to cancel them, but get you to shell out.
Yeah. I mean, this is a total tangent.
But I think there's a broader theme here, which is protectionism. So it's in keeping with that, and it's sad that India, which we like to think of in that part of the world, is in some ways a sort of bit of a bulwark, at least sort of culturally, against China, because it's ostensibly a democracy. But
Yeah.
increasingly, and I'm not going to I don't know enough about it to get into it, but, Modi seems to have some distinct favourites in terms of cultural and geographical parts of India.
Yeah.
And
I mean, no one bats an eyelid about this stuff nowadays because it's all gone that way. Everybody's like that now. It's all protectionist,
and it's back to the sort of balkanization
it's all balkanized
narrative, isn't it?
I mean, the other thing I'd say about the China thing, getting back onto the topic of the China thing, is we did kind of can slap ourselves on the back a little bit. I mean, Ericsson had warned about this, hadn't it, in its earnings only a few days before, actually. It knew
and
this was
obviously
coming.
Boya Ekon had been shitting himself. Since the start
and their
of the
share
year,
price went down something like 9% that day. So it was, I don't think there was a knock on the day that of the announcement, because it had already sort of happened. Because investors saw it coming. They'd gone down from, what was it, like you say, 11 or 12% last year with phase one to 2%. Which is a big drop-off in business. And you can already see this happening in the second quarter revenues they report from China. It's massively down, like 60%
Meanwhile,
down.
Nokia's come out and gone, actually, this is looking all right.
And Nokia...
And this will help.
Yeah, and we say... And I've been writing for quite a while, I think, now, about the possibility
19,000 base stations will help, won't they?
And this is the thing people forget, is like 4% doesn't sound very much. You think 4%, well, that's not going to make any difference, is it? It's a market where this particular project is 480,000 base stations. 4% is a big deal. And this is why the share prices move so much when China does stuff, because it is a big deal to the revenues. It does account for...
Yeah, it's by far the biggest market in the world.
It's the biggest market in the world, and it's not like they're heavily reliant on it. I think Ericsson last year made about 8% of its sales from China. But it's still a big country, and if you can get any kind of share at all...
I mean, if 8% of your revenue suddenly go away, that'll affect your share price.
It'll affect your share price. And if you're going... So Nokia basically quit. I mean, it wasn't just China Mobile they lost out with. They didn't get anything with Unicom or Telecom either when it comes to RAN work, 5G RAN work. So if they can go from 0 to 4%... this year, it's huge, and I think their share price actually, it's a bit hard to tell because this week's been a bit of a weird one for share prices, hasn't it? Because the markets have been down a lot because of coronavirus worries. So,
and inflation worries.
And stuff.
That's the
but they certainly seem to be on a bit of an upwards curve, I think, Nokia at the moment.
Well, there was...
I have to hasten, I don't own shares in Nokia because I keep talking up Nokia at the moment on this.
Well, I admit that I do. I mean, there's some people... God, I was listening to a podcast. I think a lot of American websites, and you ostensibly do write for an American website, insist... I think I was listening to Barry Weiss, and she's saying when people join New York Times, they've got to sell all their shares, just full stop.
Right.
We don't have that kind of conversation, but I've always been open. I've got like a tenner in Nokia and 20 quid in Ericsson. If anyone thinks I'm going to go out of my way to influence the market to make my tenner into 11 quid, then they must think I'm skintier than I am.
Yeah.
So, I largely keep those holdings just because then every now and then when I have a look at my sad little portfolio, I get a reminder of where they're going.
Yeah.
Like I've got a tiny bit of Vodafone.
Yeah.
And I was just interested to see whether that went up or down today because they had some earnings that were...
No, you'd have to bring it up if you owned like 10 grand's worth of stock. But yeah.
Quite. I mean, Jesus Christ. Anyway, so my conscience is clear, but I think they get a bit more uptight about that sort of thing in the States. And they'll be like, well, it's still a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
It's like, all right.
I think the other thing is why... in a way, it's maybe a surprise that Ericsson's hung on to anything at all. I mean, if the Chinese had wanted to be really cruel,
I've got
they could have.
About that.
Well, I speculated. I mean, my thought is that they can sort of make themselves out to not be shutting out the West completely, can't they? Mm-hmm. Oh, hang on a minute, we haven't actually gone. We haven't done what you did in the UK and completely banned it. And I also think that it gives them something to hold back in. It's like you've got some ammunition still, so they can sort of.
And they can keep playing this silly game of like, oh, you kick us out, but we don't kick you out.
Yeah, and I think the one other reason possibly is maybe a little bit of a sop to the operators themselves, because even though they're state controlled, the executives at those companies aren't interested in all this stuff. They just want competition and they want an option for suppliers.
But what they want seems irrelevant. I mean, these clear round percentages show that the CEO of China Mobile, as far as I can tell, has very little say in it. Maybe there's some negotiation behind the scenes where...
Well, he might be grumbling about
where
it.
Xi Jinping was like, I want those muppets out. And he goes, oh, I tell you what, how about I give them a few little percent? And anyway, but it was clearly predetermined. There was no competitive tender. Yeah. It clearly wasn't on the strength of the bids or the competence of the companies. It was clearly just a one column in a spreadsheet job is we're giving 60% to Huawei, 30% ZTE, do what the fuck you want with the rest.
It shows actually also that, we're talking about there's limited things China can do to hurt other countries without, they don't want to ban iPhone sales in China because it's kind of not good for them either. But the fact that they've gone for so long not allowing Western vendors to have a very big share of the market means there's only so much they can do to hurt them.
Shock horror.
8% is not good to lose that. But the nice thing for Ericsson at the moment is that business in other markets is booming, basically. They just won this massive Verizon contract worth about $8 billion. They've, you look at their sales in Europe at the moment, they're going up a lot. Del Oro, the forecast they tend to rely on, which is pretty reliable anyway, I think.
For market sizing.
For market sizing, he's very optimistic about growth in other markets this year, sort of bounce back from coronavirus, investment in 5G. They're actually still in it, and they're very profitable now. They're quite a lean organisation compared to where they were 2 or 3 years ago.
Because they laid off
so
a bunch
they're not.
of people.
This China stuff will hurt them a bit, but
If I
it's
was
not
looking to hire
like,
a Swede, there's probably a lot of them about.
Yeah, exactly. This China pushback will hurt them, but it won't hurt them as much as, the Europeans kind of punishing Huawei. That's a much bigger issue.
Also a one-time trick.
Yeah.
So China's got to be careful because they go, right, we're banning Ericsson because we're pissed off with Sweden. And at some stage, it's going to come to a head with Finland and
possibly
Chinese vendors. I mean, they can't kick the can down the road indefinitely, can they? I don't know. Is Finland fully part of the EU? I can't remember.
I don't know. It might be a Norway deal,
Because Sweden's famously always a bit Switzerland and a bit sort of does its own thing.
It's got its own currency, obviously, hasn't it?
It's still got krona.
What's Finland? Finland uses
Finland's
the euro.
euros, so it must be part of it then.
Yeah.
So Finland's shielded, but at some stage the EU is probably going to have to make a call one way or the other, isn't it? Americans will certainly put pressure on them. Anyway.
Well, the EU likes sitting on the fence and hedging things.
Yeah, totally. But at some stage, and they'll probably do a good job of, even if they do tip into largely banning Chinese vendors, of just sort of sugaring the pill.
Yeah.
But at some stage, then China can start banning Nokia, can start banning BMWs, can start banning fucking Swiss chocolate, whatever.
Yeah.
But they can only do it once.
Yeah, one of the interesting things to me is, that obviously the Chinese vendors have got a bigger share than they had in phase one, haven't they? You said that if you add up Nokia's and
94%.
94%, yeah, exactly. It's only 6% with European vendors now, whereas last year with 11 or 12
so
or
they've
whatever.
halved it, let's say.
And I think that this is the other thing that we didn't mention with this is that Huawei's in a pretty bad situation, and they're trying to do, in a way, this isn't surprising that they've given more work to the Chinese, regardless of what's going on with Sweden banning Chinese vendors or any of that, because they just want to protect that company to some extent. And
on that alone, I've got total sympathy for them.
Exactly, yeah.
Because the Americans have acted unilaterally.
Yeah. There's a lot of markets now where Huawei can't operate the way that it used to do, and it needs someone to kind of shore it up, and this is probably the best way to do it. And the other interesting thing is, you talked about the 700 megahertz aspect. Last year it was 2.6 gigahertz, and this is me speculating a bit here, but I did talk to some chip analysts. It's the stuff you need, that massive MIMO stuff that was going into cities last year. They're kind of really sophisticated, advanced stuff. Mm-hmm. That's where you need access to these state-of-the-art chips, arguably, that you're getting from companies like, TSMC, and you've got very limited options for where to get some of this stuff from. I think, arguably, the 700 megahertz, where you're using it in rural areas and it's lower spectrum and it's not, you're not kind of rolling out.
MIMO, you're not doing beamforming.
It's a bit easier maybe for them to supply. You
might be onto something there.
But I do wonder with Huawei, the big question still, which has not really been, even with all the updates they came out with a few months ago at their annual report, and we can see how badly things are going for them on the phone front. And the networks business has been fairly stable, I think, hasn't it? It's not gone down as much as I think
certainly
people
last
were perhaps
time
expecting.
they offered any numbers.
Yeah, they still seem to be managing on stockpiles of equipment that they built up, over a period of time when I think they first became aware of what the US was trying to do. And the question to me is, how long is this going to last? There's going to come a point where they just can't really, and this for me is a fascinating thing about someone like Germany, for instance, where Deutsche Telekom is very heavily reliant on Huawei for its 5G network. Its other suppliers, Ericsson, but I think Huawei's 2/3 of the network.
Right.
If they lose access to these, cutting edge chips, and they have to start using, 10 nanometer or 14 nanometer stuff or whatever instead of 5 or 7. I talked to people at Ericsson about this, and they said there would be an impact on the performance of equipment. They weren't talking about this in the context of Huawei, by the way, Ericsson, when I spoke to them about it. They were just saying, if we had to go down to these. So what Deutsche Telekom, by locking itself into this relationship, regardless of what's going on on the geopolitical front, it's going to face a point where it can't get updates or it can't roll out Huawei equipment, surely, that is as good as it used to be. There's going to become a sort of performance knock-on.
Well, and the great, back to sort of protectionism and geopolitics, the great game. You see it all the time, and I don't want to over-demonize China, certainly not as a country, or even as a regime, because there must be. I can't believe that everything Xi Jinping does is just, malevolent, sort of moustache-twirling emperor out of Star Wars level of malevolence. He behaves like a strong man. He's got enormous resources at his disposal. He's marshalling Chinese nationalism, but plenty of other countries marshal nationalism.
I think he's probably fairly sinister sod, personally.
I think he probably is. I'm just trying to be balanced about it because it's so easy to view him as a caricature because I don't know much about it.
No, but I don't know much about Putin either, and I'm fairly sure that he's a sinister sod as well.
Pretty sure that I'm pretty sure I'm not getting Russia either.
I just think people in that position.
Every podcast we do, I'm running out of fucking places to go.
I can't go to Myanmar anymore.
I better not slag off Spain on the podcast. Spain's great.
I think I described Myanmar's rulers as uniformed killers this week in a story.
Right,
so I definitely can't go there either.
But basically, it's lines of longitude. Once you get past about Slovakia, just don't go any further east than Slovakia, mate.
Well,
and you're probably walking on thin ice there. Yes, so while I don't want to just give a caricature because it's so easy to do, it's like he's the baddie and we're the goodies.
Yeah.
It's such a sort of binary, infantile way of looking at things. And obviously you can also get into the who started it. Like, America started unilaterally hassling Huawei, but they'll say it's because of this that happened before.
Yeah.
And, it becomes very difficult to find who started it. But what is obvious is from where we are now, these things seem destined to keep escalating.
Yeah.
So China fairly unsubtly freezes out Ericsson, bar a token 2%. So maybe Sweden doesn't do anything back, but that goes into the EU ledger or the US ledger and they go, right, well, we're going to be even bigger dicks to Huawei next time we get the chance. And then backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And you can just see it's escalating and escalating. And these sorts of things have happened throughout history. Normally what happens is it gets reset after a war.
Yeah.
But we've got a bit too good at war. So we're not really allowed to have them anymore. We can have proxy wars. We can sort of fund some Central Americans to sort of get it on.
Yeah.
But we can't really have a proper war. And so it's just hard to see. And then we've had the pandemic, which is the closest thing to a sort of global catastrophe that we've had possibly in my lifetime, possibly since the Second World War. But it hasn't really done anything as far as resetting all this stuff goes.
Well, I think a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years have come out of that situation. Actually, I think a lot of politics have actually come out of that.
Well, now we're wondering about the origins of the coronavirus. And that goes back to China.
I think it's made the geopolitics more sort of, it's brought it to the fore even more than it already was. I think it's not done anything for relations between the US and China, has it? But I think things will just go to being, like you say, it's hard to see a resolution to it. I don't think there will be necessarily a resolution. I think we're going to go back to a world that's a little bit more like we were in
Cold War.
Bro, maybe even before that, back in the days when there wasn't global trade, you used to have a smaller number of trade partners and, you didn't really have anything to do with parts of Asia perhaps. And God, that's a really long time ago. But
and I think probably this balkanization will continue until we reach such a point, let's say when 6G comes along.
Yeah.
Where you've got two competing standards.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, this is just bollocks. We've got to sort this out. And then sometime like about 2035 or something.
Yeah, maybe.
People go, all right, that was fun. We tried two separate standards. That's not working. Let's
yeah, and I think it depends on the politics.
Take decades to fucking
It depends
play
on the politics that happen, doesn't it? Because I think the move towards a 5G standard, a global 5G standard that we had, look at what was going on in China at the time, and it was the era when they were looking a little bit more open and, a little bit more, there was this very much the
global
impression
strategy.
if we bring them into the economy, then they'll get used to democracy and they'll become democratic, and that clearly hasn't worked. They've just become more authoritarian than ever. And
Hong Kong and Xinjiang.
yeah, and now they have technologies that allow them to monitor people. And I mean, I'm not optimistic about the chances of a repeat kind of uprising like you had at Tiananmen Square, where people actually decide to try and do something about it, and
they're too good at this.
democracy. They just don't.
In Hong Kong,
They're too good at
Hong Kong
monitoring
had some
it.
good uprisings about a year or two ago. But
Hong
it
Kong's
hasn't come
very
to
different from the
anything.
rest of China, though. Anyway, I think so.
But even there, my point is,
Yeah,
even
exactly.
there,
Even there, it hasn't come to anything.
kind of been squashed.
So we could end up with a situation in the 2030s where China actually looks worse than ever. It's just really tightly controlled, and it's more like something out of 1984.
But then we get back to how
novel,
we were
I mean, not the
around
year.
the Tiananmen Square time, where we think, isn't it all awful, and we wring our hands, but we basically go, it's over there.
Yeah.
It's their problem. I mean, how I wasn't old
Well,
enough to
we'd have-
remember
you'd
it
have to-
or comment on it, but during the Cultural Revolution time, where literally millions of Chinese people were dying
Yeah.
in famines and all this great leap forward, crazy shit that Mao got up to,
Yeah.
the West just sort of went, well, it's kind of their business, isn't it?
They did, but you could argue that there's things going on there now that the West should,
Like Xinjiang.
from a moral sense, intervene in, but they'll never do it because how can we?
'Cause
How
it's gotta
can we
be- it's gotta
possibly
be
do
military.
it? Yeah, how could we possibly do
And
that?
no
We
one
just
wants
don't
that.
have the power to do it anymore. So,
Right, I better
yeah.
move it on because we've got 2 more segments to do in about half an hour. I'm just going to sign off with, I quite often do like my final paragraph. And when I wrote about this, I said, this is kind of recapping what I said, but I'm going to read it out anyway. The neatly rounded total percentages indicate there was nothing competitive about this process, and that the awards were dictated by a Chinese state. So, in effect, China is largely banning non-Chinese vendors, the inverse of what it's punishing Sweden for. In other words, it's doing the same.
Yeah.
It's just saying you started it.
Can I say one thing as
yeah,
well?
sure.
The China Unicom and Telecom stuff's not out yet.
No,
so
but-
that's the.
but Ericsson said a
but
statement
Ericsson
saying,
said
"Don't
it's
get your
probably
hopes
going to
up."
get the same share in those deals as well. So, but it'd be interesting to see when they do come out.
We're probably
what
fucked with them.
But it'd be interesting to see if there's a role for Nokia in those deals. I was going to say.
Well, it could well be. And I said, and so then I finish off by saying that the main difference, apart from the token 6% of foreign vendors, is that the state intervention was overt in Sweden, i.e. the PTS going there out.
Yeah.
But as ever, it's covert in China.
Yeah.
And then I had to finish off by saying, because I'll give China the benefit of doubt, but then my final sentence was, and then it wonders why some people don't trust its companies, which I think is fair enough. We've always said that there's not enough public evidence against Huawei. On the flip side, when China will do these unilateral things, to some extent you can't blame people for going, well, then I'm going to tar all Chinese companies with the same brush.
Yeah.
Okay. Dumb pipes. So dumb pipes, as I said at the start, is, are operators offering any value other than just the raw data pipe? And you had, the thing that's prompted this segment is an interview you did with an operator group called Vion. So I'll hand it straight over to you. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, I spoke with the CEO actually.
Right, nice one.
Yeah, a guy called Khan Terzioglu.
Did he send you any bribes after?
He didn't send me any bribes.
Oh dear,
no.
Vion.
No, he wouldn't do that, no.
Well, they're Russian owned, aren't they?
Well,
send us
they're
some
not-
fucking caviar.
Yeah, okay. So Vion, the main person
vodka.
behind them, actually, they are quite a controversial group in a way, I think, because of the ownership structure of it. I don't know if you remember, for years there used to be clashes between Telenor and Alpha Group, or Altimo was the sort of telecom arm of Alpha Group, with the two big shareholders in Vimpelcom.
That's it.
Yeah,
With
and
the
they used to.
red and black, yellow and black.
Yeah,
like a
Vimpelcom's
bee.
basically it's still, the Russian branding is still Vimpelcom, but Vimpelcom was renamed Vion, the international group.
Okay.
But
So
they kept
I
the
was right
Vimpelcom
with the Russian
brand with
stuff.
Russia. But the person behind Alpha Group is Mikhail Friedman. He's one of the Russian oligarchs. So
Right.
his reputation is pretty much like a lot of the other oligarchs. They're quite sort of, they're heavy hitters, and they don't stand for any nonsense, and they can
types.
be quite.
Definitely
I don't know
not
if
going to
I wouldn't
Russia
go that far. I wouldn't say that, but
No, some people might. We wouldn't.
yeah, but they have a reputation of being quite aggressive, I think, in dealings, and they go after people, kind of thing. And if they have shareholder clashes,
so nothing like a mafia. Then I'll take it all back.
I don't mean go after people by shooting them.
No,
I just mean they sort of.
So I'll stop interrupting.
They were quite. Telenor had a really uncomfortable relationship with them for years, and ended up basically selling its stake in Vion eventually, I think in 2019. So they do have this background that's that's
Bit shifty.
a little shifty, I suppose you could say. But I didn't talk to him about any of that. I mean, he's come in there. Yeah, their biggest operation they have is Russia. They're like the number 3 operator there. Used to be number 2, have kind of lost their way a little bit, I think. But they're just a really odd-looking company. I mean, they're formed from mergers there was a company called Rascom, if you remember, years ago.
Yeah, they've been a hard one to sort of pin down.
They're a bit of a Frankenstein's monster, I think, of a telecom operator. They've got businesses in Pakistan, Bangladesh, North Africa, Russia. I mean, they're very much an emerging markets operator. But what gets lost in all of this is that they're absolutely huge in terms of subscribers. They're 213 million. So I think if you look at rankings of operator, we've just been talking about China Mobile being the biggest. They're kind of top 10. They're up there in the top 10 in terms of biggest operator groups in the world in terms of customer numbers.
Yeah, well, people underestimate the population of places like Pakistan and Bangladesh. They've got a shitload of people.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of people.
They've got something like 70 million customers in Pakistan. Yeah. So, I don't write about emerging markets maybe as much as I should do, and that's one of the reasons I think VEON's interesting, is because it has this massive presence in some of these big Asian markets, and that's kind of what makes them interesting. And now, the guy I talked to, Kaan Teziolu, who's Turkish, used to work for Turkcell. He used to be CEO of Turkcell, and I met him a couple of years ago at Mobile World Congress. And the interesting thing about him is he's got a really good, like Turkcell's one of those operators that is one of the few operators that other operators regard quite highly as having
they're really
a good
innovative,
job
aren't they?
of doing innovative stuff and position themselves quite well as a kind of challenger to internet companies.
It seems like such a generalisation, but you wouldn't necessarily, you'd expect maybe a Western European operator to be more innovative than
you would
Central Asian one.
So I remember being
Turkcell's pretty innovative.
At a do in Mobile World Congress last time it was on, 2019. Last time it was on in a big way. And going out to one of the press events there, and there was the CEO of a Western European operator talking about challenges in the industry, and actually I can't say who it was because it's all off the record, but mentioned Turkcell as one of the few examples of a company that actually
they come up a lot,
become a sort of, I hate the expression to be honest, but they've been a digital operator, kind of done a good job.
They come up a lot in the Glotel Awards, our awards,
right?
Because I have to sift through all the entries.
Yeah, so I think when VEON went to replace it to get a new CEO kind of thing, it wanted somebody. Yeah. It's
not some time server from Vodafone.
The thing is, it's really struggled with its strategy to do that, because it's obviously tried to not be a dumb pipe. It had this strategy of developing this app that would allow you to enjoy a lot of over-the-top style services, and they were basically trying to position themselves as a competitor to some of the big internet companies, I guess, with this app, and it really failed badly. It was I think it was under a guy called Jean-Yves Charlier, and I don't know who he works for now, but he basically left 2017, 2018, I forget exactly, under a bit of a cloud. The share price had gone down, and this whole...
So this is their big digital transformation play.
This transformation, which very much involved... It was very, very centralised. So the idea was that they set up, they had their headquarters in Amsterdam, probably partly for tax reasons, some people would say.
Or ganj reasons.
Because they don't have an operation there. And they also had a big London office.
That's where they're going wrong. They're all too stoned when they're making decisions.
Maybe that is what it is.
Because everyone in Amsterdam is stoned all the time. That's just a fact.
But they were developing this technology platform, this single app basically, which is going to be rolled out to all the VEON operations. So whether you're in Bangladesh or Pakistan or Russia,
you could just rebadge it,
or
you could just localize it.
I don't even know if they were going to rebadge it. It was almost going to be all done under the VEON brand, and it was the same app they wanted to develop for all these markets, and it was being developed from London and Amsterdam basically. And everything else is very centralised as well on the technology front. Like they had this sort of common OSS BSS platform they were trying to do a lot across a lot of markets, and
which makes sense when you're sort of telecoms group.
Yeah,
then you're going to get economies of scale.
This is the thing. I guess you get economies of scale. You can have one tech team doing everything and then roll it out. And hey, look, the big US companies have one platform, don't they, that they provide over the world, and it works very well for them. But it just didn't work for VEON. It just went really badly wrong. Right. This app never really took off. And
they blew a lot of cash on it.
And they blew a lot of cash on it. And then they had this sort of interim period where this woman called Ursula Burns, who's an American executive, used to be CEO of Xerox.
I remember writing up with her.
She used to be head of Xerox, yeah. She came in and has basically looked after the company while they tried to sort out a lot of the mess that was
Great name,
created.
Ursula. There should be more Ursulas around.
Yeah, and they
Old school name.
they sold a few operations, and they basically just almost just sort of kept things going. But one of the things she started to do was sort of decentralize things a bit. So they've now gone from this, having everything done in Amsterdam and London to totally changing tack. And basically, they don't even have a CTO anymore, by the way. They don't even have a group CTO. So every single operating company is in charge of its own initiatives.
So they're
totally autonomous.
Full-on centralised to full-on decentralised.
And a lot of it's now being driven by this guy they brought in, who's obviously got a very good reputation having worked for Turkcell, one of the few operators that has made a good stab at being a digital operator. They also introduced this guy called Sergi Herrero, who used to work for Facebook. He was sort of in charge of Facebook's mobile payment stuff, basically. They brought them both in as co-CEOs. Herrero's now stepped down into a kind of advisory role, so they've only got one, which I think is a good move. To have two CEOs, I don't think is a really good long-term thing. So the only CEO is now
Oracle's about the only company I'm aware of that persistently does that.
And this guy is basically trying to make a go at this, establishing VEON as not a dumb pipe, but as a kind of digital operator, is the expression he uses, but in a very, very different way from how they've done it in the past.
Other people you have... we're changing from being a CSP to a DSP.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the expressions are terrible.
To digital service provider. Yeah.
I mean, my main questions for him were that it didn't go very well in the past. What makes it different now, I guess, and telcos have never done. Regardless of centralisation or decentralisation, telcos have never really succeeded in this area. So how? Why do you think you're gonna succeed? And well, one of the arguments that he makes, and he brings this from Turkcell, is that at Turkcell, he makes a big deal about cultural sensitivities, and the fact that the US tech giants, they might be very big in the UK, they might be very big in France, they might be very big in Spain, but in a lot of the markets that VEON's in, they're nowhere at all. They're just not really relevant. People aren't digging. So VEON has for instance, a TV app called Toffee that they supply in Bangladesh, another one of their markets, and it's the most popular TV streaming service. There's a bigger opportunity for... He always made the case that there was a bigger opportunity for Turkcell to do some of this stuff than there was for, say, a BT or a Vodafone. I think that's a really good point, because
we forget, England, UK, is probably in the top 3 net recipients of American culture in the whole world. So we're kind of used to it. We were watching fucking Dukes of Hazzard and A-Team and stuff when we were kids. But in loads of other places in the world, possibly even France, because obviously English isn't a language that they're just not going to be so beset by American exported culture, and so
we
I can
had
see
the
how
A-Team and Dukes of Hazzard,
right, with just like French dubbing over it.
Yeah.
What's French for? I love it when a plan comes together.
Oh, I don't know, but the A-Team was called l'agence tout risque, which is the all risk agency.
Excellent. Cool. I like it when it's not just called l'équipe A.
No, it wasn't. And one character was called Looping, the crazy explosive expert.
But
guy.
even if my point is, culturally, even if you did import it, it was Frenchified. Whereas with us, we didn't have to. It's just straight up American accents.
So does that mean, like, in shows like this, because in France they would have to like change the references, like they make a joke about maybe a politician or something that you knew the French people didn't know, so they would replace it with something else. So what about here? They do, obviously.
Have you ever checked out the news? I'm sure you have. This is kind of a rhetorical question. When the American elections are on in the UK, we make more of a big deal about their elections than we do our own fucking elections. It's ridiculous how much we hang on to their coattails culturally. And that's not to diss them. Every week I find myself apologising that I'm not dissing Americans. Not to diss them, but I sort of think, all right, it's the most powerful country in the world. Yes, great cultural exporter. Yes, lots to admire about it. But fucking hell, can we just we're
someone else totally Americanized culture, and I think the language is a big issue as well. A lot of these countries, don't have, Netflix and Amazon, let's be honest, and the internet giants have done very well in kind of Anglophile type countries where English is spoken widely or even as a first
Certainly
language.
Anglophone,
and I think it was interesting, but he wasn't saying that they were that they were trying to always compete against Netflix, by the way, or Amazon Prime. He very much saw them as partners in a lot of cases, but he just said there's a lot of room for alternatives, and there are also opportunities in these countries that you don't have in other markets. So, and some of this has come with the pandemic, but things like online education, online healthcare, some of this, financial services opportunities are very big in emerging markets. And I think, Vion's quite heavily into this in the same way that a company like Safaricom would be in Africa. They have quite a big role in that area.
Yeah.
So these are all really valid points. The issue of decentralization, I asked him this, why does decentralization make sense? And again, it's very much about one size fits all just doesn't make sense when you have markets that are as different as ours. Totally. Russia has so little in common with somewhere like Bangladesh culturally.
100%.
So it didn't make any sense at all for an operator with operations in those countries to try and do everything from Amsterdam. Now the danger, as you were saying, you get these economies of scale, which is another question for him. How do you ensure that you can do this and not have some kind of impact on profits? And I think that remains to be seen. He was saying they've tried to mitigate that somehow by having, they have these sort of online forums so they can share knowledge and expertise, which they didn't used to have before.
This is internal, is it?
Yeah, it's like an internal thing where they'd have, so they don't have a group CTO anymore, but they have, for instance, a group where the CTOs of the different operating companies can now liaise and exchange expertise. But they are going into some areas that we've seen other operators moving into, like towers divestment, for instance.
Everyone loves that
as a way of kind of raising capital, perhaps. Maybe that's partly a mitigation strategy. But my concern would be, my takeaway would be, it's
from your interview with the lad.
He's very compelling and he's very convincing, and I think he's, if anybody's going to make this work, trying to do it that way, then he's definitely, I think, the person to have, given his experience at Turkcell. My only concern would be, even with all the things he says about cultural sensitivities, I just think the big US tech companies have such heft these days. They have such a big, you're talking about trying to get into areas where things like AI are important and machine learning and software expertise. And I just wonder, and he was talking about how they've hired software engineers now that they didn't used to have, and they've built up staff in places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and there's a bigger kind of number of software people in Russia even as well. But I just still wonder whether you're always going to be subscale compared to compared to the US tech companies in a way that's maybe damaging to the strategy. That would be my only concern.
Pick your fights. Yeah, is what I'd say. So I'm going to move it on just because we're running out of time. But even American operators keep throwing in the towel. There's a story Wei wrote earlier on this week about Verizon also handing over its messaging service to Google, with AT&T and T-Mobile already having done that. So that's all of them. Yeah. And then there was another one that Mary wrote yesterday about AT&T kind of throwing in the towel for the content side in Latin America. Yeah. This is actually part of DirecTV, which is an AT&T acquisition. But they had this thing called where's it gone? Anyway, it had a name.
They're incredibly defensive at the moment.
Vrio.
I've noticed AT&T.
What in terms of?
Well, Mike Dano did a story on their earnings, I think, which are out this week. And apparently on the earnings call, they were desperate to sort of make this whole. Maybe it was some of our criticism actually that's prompted this, but the whole public cloud deal that they've done with. Who's theirs one with Microsoft?
If this podcast starts changing.
Well. But I know they were very upset
about. To sell my tenner in.
I know they were very upset about some of the coverage that came out of reading on the Microsoft deal, and apparently a lot of the chat on the call was about them making out that deal isn't we're just giving up, and letting Microsoft do everything.
I hope it was you. Good for you.
Well, not just me. I just think the general chat
collectively
on the pod,
like reading. But yes, you never know. We've chatted about it before. There aren't that many people. I think one of the reasons we get compliments on the podcast isn't just because of whatever it is that you and I bring to it. But we are people who have an above average knowledge on this particular bit of subject matter, bothering to talk about it in words of one syllable, while getting quietly pissed in the process.
What could be better?
And
pissed is a big word. I don't think we're pissed, are we?
Well, we're getting there. We're on our way. It takes a while. If you're just on Camden Pale, if we're doing tequila shots, it might be a different matter.
Next week, we won't be here.
No, exactly. I'll just be doing them in Suffolk. But yes, it could be anything. It could be any sort of niche area. The reason I got onto that tangent is, I'm not trying to blow smoke up our arse, but, what influence might we have? Presumably, we'll talk about this little thing. Other people, we get analysts like Dean Bubley being kind enough to flag up our stuff on Twitter. It just sort of percolates through and goes into the mix.
Yeah.
And all the other people, the analysts, the other journalists, the equity analysts, the other commentators, the people who work for the FT, Wall Street Journal, they all go into the mix. And someone like, the CEO of AT&T or the person whose job it is to keep an eye on what everyone's saying, it will eventually percolate its way up to them, and we are contributors to that.
Yep.
So, that's part of the fun of being a journalist, is from your tiny little, spare room where you work, you can have some small influence. It's impossible to gauge how much, but it makes you feel not completely irrelevant, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, AT&T's flogging this thing Vrio, and it's taking
quite a lot of money, isn't it? They're selling it.
Well, it's taking an impairment charge of 4.6 billion on the value of the asset at 30th of June. So basically, it's flogging it for not that much. I think. Oh yeah, we are. Wall Street Journal quoted a company spokesperson as saying the deal implied an enterprise value of 500 million paid over a few years. So they're basically writing down 90% of the value of this fucking thing. I mean, that's such a... I'm sure there's lots of reasons, and I'm sure it probably is as a good move from where they are now. But it's just, to me, yet another example of... Back to your thing.
But this is the thing about this is the question mark over what the stuff that Vion's doing, though, isn't it? Because South America, content business, South America, Spanish speaking, local sensitivities, local culture stuff, and even then, they didn't manage to make a success of a content business.
Yeah,
and you kind of wonder whether how much this stuff really matters. It's not as though Google and Amazon, let's be honest, it's not as though Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Netflix and all these other big US tech companies don't have resources that they can deploy in these markets. And they do. I mean, God, there's Netflix now is full of French language content and like Lupin and all sorts of things.
Catty is really into something.
Yeah. I would say there's probably 2 or 3. I wouldn't say it's full of it. But
it's getting there, though.
Overrun. Okay, we better move on. But I mean, that's just another anecdotal contribution to the whole... People try not to be a dumb pipe and they're not working, and maybe they're just going to stick with being a dumb pipe. I mean, what Mary keeps saying when she writes about AT&T things, she goes, AT&T decides to focus on being a telco, which is her sort of flippant way of going
dumb pipe. Yeah. But I mean, I suppose my takeaway from the Vion thing maybe is that I don't think many companies are going to be able to succeed doing, being digital operators, to be honest with you. If by digital operator you mean trying to compete alongside the US tech giants, I think most of them are going to end up as dumb pipes and utilities, unfortunately. That's the inevitable way it's going.
Yes, I think you're right. Pierre, are we really having to knock it on the head in 8 minutes?
Can go over a bit.
Tiny
well,
bit.
we're only talking about non-telecom stuff now.
I know, but 8 minutes is still very little time for the last segment. It's our fault. It's my fault for not managing the time. I just thought I'd check in with Pierre. Anyway, so let's move on to that. So, bugbears. Yeah. I'll start with mine. Yeah. I wrote 2 stories in the last 24 hours to do with censorship. I will start with the first one I wrote, which was the sort of lead in the newsletter today. I've got a link to it. There it is. Which is that in the UK, my headline was UK government ties itself in knots over social media censorship. Basically, they've got this thing called a draft online safety bill. And what they want... we haven't got much time to get into the weeds, but that's probably just as well. What they want is to increase online safety. So it's just an incredibly vague term. And the long and short of it is, whenever you talk about safety, you're normally talking about taking freedoms away. I think there's an equilibrium. There's a continuum where you've got safety at one end, freedom at the other, and we're just moving the dial somewhere in the middle. Obviously, complete freedom would be an anarchy, which wouldn't be safe. And we'd have to be dealing with stuff like they're having to deal with in South Africa or whatever at the moment.
Yeah.
But complete safety means some kind of Orwellian, absolutely centrally controlled environment. And so it's about finding that happy medium in between. And I, as I'm sure anyone who's been listening to this for a while, anyone knows me, I'm more inclined towards the freedom side. I'm prepared to take some risks in order to be able to do what I want.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Other people are different. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I just get the impression that governments in the UK and the US, when it comes to censoring what people say online, are moving further and further away from freedom. And so we actually had this sort of committee chaired by a Lord, Lord Gilbert.
Good name.
Yeah, and they had a pop at this online safety bill, but it was fairly vague stuff. But as I said, that there's one critique concerning a thing called Clause 11, which seeks to force internet platforms to stamp out online speech that, while not illegal, is still harmful. So it's trying to sort of fuck around with the law a little bit.
Yeah.
So we've got illegal speech, as we've said loads of times. I can't write on Twitter, "Let's all go around Ian's house and kill him," especially if I identify which Ian. Well, every Ian. Everyone called Ian in the whole world.
Yeah.
But that's already illegal.
Yeah.
Which is why I hasten to add, I wasn't actually calling for that.
You put it out there now. I'm really
put it
in
out
trouble
there. I know
now.
I could probably get nicked. Well, there's a woman in Scotland about to do 6 months of jail time for some picture of a suffragette ribbon that she posted on Twitter 2 years ago, because they think it's transphobic or some shit like that.
Suffragette ribbon? Transphobic?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Just don't get me started.
Okay.
And so they say, we do not support the government's proposed duties on platforms in Clause 11 of the draft online safety bill relating to content which is legal, which may be harmful to adults. We're not convinced that they are workable or could be implemented without... And they sort of go on, and they're basically going, look, it's either illegal or it's not. Where I disagree with them is they go, if you think it should be stamped down, I'll make it illegal. And I don't like that, because they're basically going... I mean... It's really tricky, because I've always said social media censorship should be constrained to what's illegal.
Yeah.
So I can't call for a pile on you, but I can say something quite objectionable, possibly even xenophobic or racist or sexist or whatever, which is unpleasant, and I wouldn't say it and I don't condone it, but it's not illegal.
Yeah.
And what they're sort of saying is maybe even that stuff we should have a pop at. And they even, there was this sort of moral panic at the start of last week after the football was over, and we lost on penalties, and then a few dickheads on social media had a pop at some of the penalty takers on racial grounds, which is obviously out of order. But everyone went mental. That became the story.
I know.
And it was just a few people, and most of those people were not even UK based, and they're probably even bots. But the media all ran with it and turned to a thing. And of course, we've got this current administration, especially the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, just seems to make all his decisions based on Twitter.
Racist bots, nightmare. That's the last thing we need.
No, but I think what you do get is, if not bots, then you get accounts that are designed because the response to social media is so Pavlovian.
Yeah.
You just know if someone says that's something out of order, tons of people are going to jump on it.
Yeah.
That you've got people in China, in Russia, in the Middle East, in anywhere that just wants to fuck with the West. You get them just because it's so easy to create a Twitter account. You just get them stirring it, and we always rise to the provocation, which is kind of sad. And even this guy Gilbert, this Lord Gilbert, he goes, if the government believes that a type of content is sufficiently harmful, it should be criminalised. We would expect this to include, for example, any of the vile racist abuse directed at members of the England football team, which isn't already illegal.
Do you know what all this? I mean, we've talked about this before, but all this social media stuff just makes me think. All these people at the moment don't seem to have been aware that for hundreds of years, blokes have been standing around in pubs coming out with all sorts of foul-mouthed abuse.
It's because it's
and
public
it's probably
now.
been so much worse than it ever has been, than it is today.
Some of this seems class-driven.
Yeah, and you get a tiny percentage of it online, and it's like, the whole world's racist.
And everyone's naively pretending that this is a new thing.
It's unbelievable.
The wall just fell down.
Yeah, I mean, even the wall is shocked.
Even the wall's shocked
by what's going on.
That we dare to broach these tasty subjects. And the other point I make before I move on to my other story, and I hand it over to you, for your bugbear, is I point out again. I'll stress one more time: no hassling of our players or anyone. Hassling people at all, let alone players on racial grounds, is completely out of order.
Yeah.
No one's contesting that. But
I still think you should be able to say that was a crap penalty, mate. That Marcus Rashford one was terrible. He didn't even hit the.
I know, it was nearly brilliant. He tried to be all Brazilian.
He tried to
about
be
it
clever
and, fake out a goalie,
then
he
basically
fucked
hit
it
the
up.
post or whatever. But, yeah.
Yes, obviously you should be allowed to hassle them, but that's part of it. So can you hassle them? Yes. Can you be abusive?
No, you can't be abusive. He's a great player, but he took a crap penalty.
But have you ever been to a football game and been in the crowd?
Yeah.
And basically, everyone in the crowd is calling everyone.
Yeah, I know.
Very bad words all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but very little that's racist I've heard when the matches I've been to.
Well, because
generally abusive comments.
Because the good thing is that culturally, even among shouty football fans, overt racism is not acceptable anymore, which is good, and we should celebrate that. But there's still plenty of abuse.
Yeah,
just not necessarily of an explicitly racial nature.
No.
And the point I make is
a lot of it's the comments like the referee's a wanker.
At the very least. In other words, I don't want to make Pierre get his bleeper out. But some of the few words he'll still bleep are said quite a lot at football games. Anyway, and just the other point is, so now we've got special laws protecting ethnic minority footballers from people being horrible to them on the internet. Maybe not a good idea. But then I point out that the famous author J.K. Rowling, she sort of picked a team in this sort of women versus trans activists stuff that goes on, and she gets sent.
Yeah, that's disgraceful.
She gets sent things like this tweet I embedded. I wish you a very nice pipe bomb in mailbox. So it's sort of semi-literate, but that seems like a more explicit call to violence.
Yeah.
But that doesn't get brought up in Parliament, and Lord Gilbert doesn't bang on about that. So it's all very selective. So that's one of my big issues about censorship is the selectiveness about it. And then the second story I wrote just before I came out today, I've spoken about Section 230, which is a part of a US law that basically gives special privileges to social media companies in that they cannot be held to be legally liable for the content that's on them, which makes sense. Yeah. Obviously, social media doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because it has to be instantaneous. I have to be able to put up something on Facebook.
Yeah, it's not
and it doesn't have to wait a day to go through moderation. And anyway, moderating at that kind of scale would be impractical.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, they're increasingly acting in an editorial capacity, and they are censoring stuff, or they are putting labels over stuff they don't like the look of. And so then you get into this grey area. Are they a publication like Reading or Telecoms.com, or are they a social media platform? Anyway, and Section 230 kind of dictates that in the States. And now these two Democrat senators, they've got to be in their bonnet about health misinformation. So obviously throughout the whole coronavirus thing, you've had some people going, like I've downplayed coronavirus. In fact, that in some ways that I now think I downplayed it excessively at the start. I still don't think it's necessarily justified to shut down the entire world for a year, but it is obviously a big deal.
Yeah.
And then you got this talk about vaccines. Like I think everyone's been double vaccinated in this room, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. But I don't think I want my kids to be, who are 17 and 14. The main reason is because the risk-reward profile when you get to their age isn't so favourable. At my age, let alone my dad's age, just have it.
Yeah.
Because if you get the bug, it'll kill you.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a small chance of a blood clot or myocarditis or something like that. But that's a risk worth taking. But when you're younger, then you get into a discussion of whether or not that's a risk worth taking. Anyway, but they seem to want sort of pretty much any.
But then it's
have you noticed that pro-vaxxers have become as bad as anti-vaxxers now?
Well, everyone gets a bit of a bee in their bonnet. What were you going to say, Pierre?
No, I think the general consensus is it's not about your kids getting sick, it's about your kids getting sick, being totally fine with it, and
passing
giving
on to other people.
Yeah,
but then if other people have been vaccinated, either the vaccines work or they don't. Anyway, this is a whole minefield that we don't have enough time to get into.
So now we're protecting the anti-vaxxers, technically.
Well, no, I don't like people who are fanatical about anything. Yeah. And actually, I've noticed some comments on Twitter recently where people have, I think we talked about this before, but people who are very religious or people who are very anti-religious, like the Richard Dawkins crowd, they can become
in many ways just as bad.
Quite fanatical. Yeah. And there are people now who are actually fanatical about vaccines. I mean, I think you should have it. I pretty much agree with your view. I'm not really sure that my 11-year-old should be having it, but people are adults. Yeah, it makes sense. But
it's also their choice. I could choose.
But it's also their choice, and I don't like people who sort of. I mean, there's a lot of commentary on Twitter that's almost making anybody who decides not to have it out to be a Nazi, kind of thing, and it's just ridiculous.
That's Godwin's law.
You can't be. People who are pro-vaxxer to that degree, as bad as anti-vaxxers. Actually, they're as fanatical
my other
and
problem
ridiculous.
with people being unconditionally pro-vaccine is that they don't seem to be making any concession to the fact that these vaccines were A, developed very quickly, and B, in the case of the American ones, using a very novel technology.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you're entitled to be a bit like, well, hold on a sec.
Well, who knows? We might all find out in 3 years' time that we've picked up some strange illness that will turn us into zombies. A bit like that sort of what's that program? What's that film? I Am Legend, with where they develop a cure for cancer, don't they? And everybody gets vaccinated, and
and then it turns into a thing.
and it turns and it ends up turning them all into vampires eventually.
Right. I reckon in 3 years' time, Bill Gates is going to be remote controlling us with a little.
Do we know how it
remote
starts
control.
in The Walking Dead? Because I don't think
there's no origin story in The Walking Dead.
There's another Walking Dead thing that I've heard about.
And there's another one where it's international, I think.
Anyway,
Fear of the Walking Dead.
Fear of the Walking Dead. There we go.
Imagine the backstory though.
So the thing about this health. So these two Democrat senators, Amy Klobuchar and someone with Latin sound name, Lujan, something like that, have come out with this thing called the Health Misinformation Act. And basically the operative term, especially in the States, for anyone who wants to censor, is they talk about misinformation.
Yeah.
So you've got misinformation, disinformation. Disinformation is, my broad understanding of it is deliberate. You know, I'm deliberately in bad faith lying to you to try and deceive you. Misinformation is me just not knowing what I'm talking about. You could argue a lot of my articles are misinformation on that basis. But I've yet to be sued over them. 7 years and counting. And so this is called the Health Misinformation Act. So it's the more benign, milder form of getting things wrong. And what they want to do is they want to create an exception to Section 230, which specifically applies to health misinformation, where if a social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, disseminates health misinformation, they can be held liable to it. Held liable for it. Now, there's so many things wrong with this. One guy, like I quoted an American journalist who's a good journalist, but is quite tribally, sort of, as a lot of journalists are, on the sort of broadly left Democrat side.
Yeah.
He goes. So when Trump wins in 2024, and it gives all the power to this HHS secretary, which stands for Health and something Secretary, Health and Human Services. So basically, all the power will be in the hands of this one politician who's the equivalent of like what Matt Hancock was before he couldn't put his Hancock away. But there we go. So now it'll be Sajid Javid, isn't it? I trust you'll be a good boy, Sajid. And so it'll be in the power of Sajid Javid to just be able to go, that's misinformation, that's not misinformation, that's censored, that isn't. That's too much power to have in one person. That's kind of what this guy Masnick says. He goes, so when Trump wins in 2024 and his HHS secretary declares that promoting vaccines is misinformation, what happens then? So what he's really saying, other than, I think, rather crudely mischaracterizing Trump as just being the diametric opposite.
Yeah.
Once this genie's out of the bottle, once the power's there, then when the other team gets in, they've got the power as well. This is why you constrain power, even if it's your team in charge at the time. And another thing I point out in it is Biden, who we know has just not got all his fucking marbles. You know, let's be kind. I'm sure he's a great bloke, but he's not firing all cylinders, is he? And he's come out with a thing where he goes, you're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. Full stop. More of the wall falling off. What's going on?
It's whenever you say something outrageous like that,
right,
Scott.
It just gets shocked. The wall gets shocked.
How can you possibly suggest that you might get COVID after you've been vaccinated?
So Biden's gone, you're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. Now, we know that there are people who've been vaccinated. I think Javid's one of them, funnily enough.
He got it, yeah.
Yeah. So that's misinformation. But presumably they're not saying that he should be banned or censored or all that sort of thing. So anyway, I'll finish the rant there. My point is broadly about censorship, and these are two current examples about it. It's impossible to define. It gives too much power to one person to define these things, and yet politicians in the UK and the US, and I suspect elsewhere, are still trying to take control of the internet. To use the metaphor again, put the genie back in the bottle, and try and control public discourse. And I just don't think it's possible. Did you? I think we might have touched on it a little bit. Your bugbear, which was to do with like the NHS app and everyone getting pinged. Did you have any last stuff you wanted to say before we wrap up?
Pingdemic.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't write a story on it, but
No,
I can
that's
make
why we're
it.
calling it bugbears.
We don't have time.
I can sort of make it relevant to telecom, I suppose, in a way.
Certainly with the app.
Yeah, not just the app though. I think this whole they're calling it the pingdemic, and I think it's we were told on the 19th of July we were going to be back to normal, and able to move around, do the things we used to do, and here we have this ridiculous situation where people are, because infections are still spreading, even though hospitalizations and deaths are relatively low, they're more like sort of at seasonal flu levels. We're now in this ridiculous situation where hundreds of thousands of people are being told they have to stay at home and self-isolate because they've been near someone who might have been exposed to COVID. Actually, my own dad got texted, I think, or pinged on when he was on his holiday in Wales, telling him to self-isolate for 6 days or whatever it was. And it's just it's got to the point.
What did your dad do?
Well, he actually totally ignored it,
So
and then
fuck you.
Which I can say on this because nobody knows who he is. So,
Mr. Morris.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not exactly a rare name, that.
No.
So,
It's like if it was my dad, you could track him down in no time.
It's got to the point where we've even got now food shortages apparently because people who work in warehouses and supermarkets can't come in to stack shelves and stock up. I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers. The reason I would say it's relevant to telecom is I noticed today in the news they'd exempted food workers. They'd done the sensible thing and exempted food workers from having to self-isolate.
But even that is just policy on the fly.
That's policy on the fly. But what about telecom is to me another sector where people need to be able to go out and install stuff and fix problems. I mean, especially now more than ever in the pandemic when we're all bloody well working at home and internet connections are super important, and if they're not if problems aren't dealt with, then there's an economic cost. People who are telecom engineers and technicians should, to me, be similar. I don't know if they are, but they should be similar.
No, I don't think they are.
I mean, I personally think the whole thing's absolutely bonkers now.
Yeah.
That it should. There's a rule to end this, I think, on August the 16th, isn't there? It should be ended.
But even that's
now.
not going to be totally ended. There's going to be other little caveats.
Probably
they're talking about vaccine passports in nightclubs. There seems to be a long tail to this, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, this is my worry, is that this is going to drag on for months and months and months. I mean, we'll still be stuck with this crap in 2022, no doubt, stuff going on that's to do with...
And you'll still be wondering whether you can go and check out your in-laws in Slovakia. And I'll be still wondering whether I can go to the Canaries.
I hope not. But...
And all that kind of thing. All right, I think we've tested Pierre's patience regarding the other stuff he's got to do.
Coming up to
a quarter of an hour past we said we were going to end. So, yeah... We'll wrap that up there.
Yeah.
It's been fun. It's nice that we're getting people all around the world saying they like the podcast. Bear with us. We're all going to go off and not get a tan in Suffolk or whatever. And it could be the first one that you see from us again is done remotely with Pierre producing it from Normandy or wherever you're going to be. So cool. All right, I'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us in a month or something.